Great, thank you very much, Penny. As Penny mentioned earlier, feel free to please ask questions during the middle. I will sort of take questions as they come up if it seems like it fits with the flow. So if it, I'll see your question, but I may wait slightly to deal with it. But I will try to answer them sort of as we go rather than at the end, so please feel free to ask things. I'm also joined today by two of my colleagues, John Childs and Stuart Hebblestone, who are also part of the Assessment Journey program that we're talking about. I don't know if Stuart and John, do you guys want to say hi now?
Hi, this is Stuart. Hi, John here.
And they're basically will be on hand in case there's questions which relate to the program that are more in sort of the areas they've been focused on as well. As Penny said, this is actually a presentation we did for Blackboard Learning Teaching Conference in Groningen in April. So this is also a follow-up to sort of a conference presentation we did the year before, which was introducing the program, so this is providing a bit of an update. It's not just about the grades journey. It is about a sort of wider assessment program we did. Part of that is the kind of grades journey functionality, but there are other features related to Blackboard software and things that we'll discuss, which aren't just grades journey related things. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my my webcam just so it should stream a little bit better for people. Also, I don't think you need to see me the whole time anyway. So, okay, so we start by the end of the session. You should find out more about the Assessment Journey program, learn about the Blackboard solutions that we are using, and consider the challenges faced when implementing sort of a wider program around assessment to improve assessment at your university or other institution. Just a very brief intro about Sheffield Hallam University. This is a kind of picture of our main campus area. We're the 6th largest university in the UK, in the north of the UK. We've about 31,500 students, 2,000 plus academic staff, and we're broken into 4 faculties. So that just gives you a brief overview. So the Assessment Journey program is designed to be a program that, as it says at the top of the mission statement, supports the university's strategy to deliver a consistent, seamless, and improved assessment experience for staff and students. And what that really kind of means is we've tried to look at the holistic experience of assessment, specifically, I should say, coursework assessment. So we haven't touched exams for the most part with the assessment journey. It's been focused on the kind of coursework elements that students might be doing. But we've tried to look at it from the perspective of kind of how things can be improved for staff, for students, and for sort of both academic and professional services staff. The goal was to look at sort of the assessment life cycle, we called it, and how technology could fit and improve that to both improve things like guidance and information, but also be able to provide students with a course-wide view. And by course, I mean, for instance, as sort of BSc in biology. So that's sort of, you might call it a program of study, just in case people's terminology is different. By course, we are meaning wider than one Blackboard unit of study, but actually the whole experience the student has in terms of getting their degree. And then also looking at submitting, receiving coursework online, publishing feedback on marks online, and then looking at the transfer of marks between our systems. Our SIS that we use, the Student Information System, we use as tribal SITs, and obviously we use Blackboard as a VLE. The program lasts for 3 years. We've now finishing the 2nd year of the program, and we split it into 2 main projects. One was assessment design and delivery, which was focused very much on sort of changes to academic practice and policy, and people thinking sort of wider about their assessment. And then the online management assessment, which in particular focused on technologies to support online submission, online feedback, marking, things like that. So to start with, we came up with a vision for what that would look like. So on the left, it's hard to read them, but there's a series of statements. For instance, assessment is recognized as an integral part of the university's strategy. They're designed around learner-focused principles. The expectations are clearly set for the students about what is needed to be submitted and how they need to do it. There's a series of things. So we started with a kind of vision of like what would we imagine good assessment to look like, which isn't to say that we didn't have some of these things. Of course, we had many of these things already, but they kind of to keep our principles in mind when we're doing it. We borrowed the life cycle from which Manchester Met had developed as part of a JISC project. They have a sort of assessment life cycle. That's the sort of circle on the right, and we adapted that a little bit to sort of look at what are the elements of the assessment process for us. So we have specifying, sort of determining the assessment at a sort of wider design stage than the actual sort of setting of the assessments, how we support people doing assessment, submitting, when they're actually submitting the work, marking and feedback of the work, the sort of recording of the marks in systems, returning those marks to students, the boards that happen to approve those marks, and then reflecting and reviewing on your assessment. So we sort of used that as a lever to kind of think about each of the parts and where technology and how these things might be affected by things like moving online. In terms of the timescales we're looking at, over the 3 years, we sort of focused the first year on scoping in terms of what technology we wanted, in terms of planning things out, introducing a framework around assessment design and delivery to the university, and resources and guidance for people, as well as encouraging people to engage early. I should say as well that we weren't starting from a 0 point where nobody was submitting online. We had something like I don't know, about a third of our modules doing some sort of online assessment before this, online submission or returning of marks, and a much higher percent doing returning of feedback, much higher percentage doing returning of marks online. That was around 60% of our Blackboard sites doing that effectively. So we sort of have always had that in mind, that it's not starting from 0. It's about how we can improve things for people who are already doing things as well. So in that first year, of course, there were people who moved early ahead of requirements, and as well as people who were already doing it. But by this sort of coming academic year, which starts in sort of August, September, we now have a requirement that levels 4 and 7, so essentially incoming students to the university, as well as foundation year students, would have a requirement in terms of online submission of their work, as well as getting feedback online as well. And then for the next academic year, 2017-18, it will be standard practice across all of our provision. So we're kind of trialing it with some, but of course this will touch most of our university staff next year in some way. It may not for all of their practice, but will touch for a lot. And a number of programs have already decided to just kind of go for it next year anyway. So as I said, there was one program we split into 2 projects, and it was to kind of make sure we didn't lose the pedagogic rationale behind things and it just become completely about the technology. Whether or not it's worked exactly the way we wanted to, I think is a question. I'm not sure we've, by splitting the 2 projects, in some ways it made the work more manageable. In other ways, it kind of led to some tensions at times between who has responsibility for what or things. But that was kind of the rationale behind it. In terms of the assessment design and delivery, they've delivered a number of things. One is an assessment essentials framework, which we can actually, John and Stuart, can you type that URL in the chat so that people could access the link, please? And the assessment for students framework, which is effectively a student perspective. So assessment essentials focuses on staff. What do they need? And it is actually a kind of wheel that in terms of how they access it, that follows that earlier wheel and has guidance, policy, strategy. I'll load it as well. So actually, I don't know if I probably can't show it without sharing my screen or something, can I? Let's see. I think that'll load it for you. It loads horribly in this browser, so go back. You can load it and look at it yourself. That's probably the best thing to do because it didn't work in the Blackboard web launching thing. So anyway, that's you can look at it yourself. Essentially, it's a big resource, and it covers each step of the process around that. And in there, we have things like the case studies that are mentioned as well, and looking at how people have changed their assessment, as well as things like links to our step-by-step guidance on how to do some of this. The Assessment for Students framework is something that we're developing currently as well, and that hasn't been released yet, but it's looking at how we kind of produce maybe a more simplified wheel for students around what we want them to do with assessment, what we want them to do with their feedback, and encouraging their engagement and things that they should think about, pointing out resources for them as well. The main part of the project, our program that I'll talk about, is the project which is online management assessment, because that's where there's more of the technology and more of the relationship with Blackboard as well. But this one, we were looking at delivering policy, process, and technology to provide a more integrated models for online submission, marking, and feedback. As I said, a number of people are already doing things. So part of what we looked at was how could we make what they already do better? What are the bits that frustrate them the most? What are the bits that they struggle with that we could improve things, as well as what is maybe additional requirements or features that we would need to think about that we'd want to introduce. And one of those things is a kind of portal for staff and students as sort of one way of pulling together assessment information. One of the limitations, I think, of Blackboard currently is it's very, I would say, modular in the sense that sort of each Blackboard site, each Blackboard course is kind of separate, and there's not that many tools that kind of give you that holistic view across the thing. Now, I think there have been some improvements in that in terms of the kind of student profile, but again, it doesn't necessarily pull all your due dates together as easily and things as we would like in a list, or allow you to sort of see patterns across your feedback that you might be getting during study. So those are things that we sort of hope to try to address ourselves in the program. So the major points of activities in terms of, we took that life cycle that we actually focused on, because there's a number of things in there that we determined maybe the role of technology wasn't as great, or there wouldn't be a big change on. But in terms of one is setting up assessment data. So we don't have very much data about our assessment in the student information system currently. We have sort of, is it a coursework or is it exam and a weighting, and that's about it really. So looking at having more data to then be able to do more with that. Providing students with an assessment overview, which we do separately in another system currently, but as we kind of moved online, it stopped making as much sense to do it in this other system, so looking at how we could integrate that. Submitting work, so the principle being online where possible. We don't want people to change their assessment just to be able to submit online. But we did want people to be able to, where there was already doing things that could have been submitted online, to start doing that online. Originality checking, so use of Turnitin, and also exploring Safe Assign, a feature we haven't really used before. Marking, however, we've pretty much left up to lecturers. We've given options around doing it on paper in addition to doing it online. So we haven't specified you must mark online, but we have said that the feedback needs to be online, and also looked at doing the moderation activities online as well, particularly in terms of external moderation, external examining. And then transferring the marks from Blackboard to SITS, and then looking at reassessment where that might be needed. For anyone who's come late as well, feel free, if you have questions as we go, to just type them in the chat and we'll try to pick them up. Unfortunately, this slide hasn't come out quite as clear, but it is very hard to read anyway. I'll just sort of step you through the kind of important parts of this one. It's worth, let's see, there's a little pointer thing I can get, I think. With the thing, if you look sort of starting here, we have this concept of the, these are the main boxes to follow, is the kind of series of boxes this way. We mapped out what the workflow we would imagine is necessary to sort of have work submitted online. As I said, it's not that things weren't already happening. And then what we did is each of these boxes might be a kind of development of improvement that we we want to add into the process to make it work more smoothly. So for instance, in the data setup, one of the things is this one says more data to be held in our SIS, basically, because as I mentioned earlier, we don't have that much data about the assessment in there. Thus, to be able to kind of do more with it, we need more data. So some of these developments are effectively just do something like add the data or whatever. Others are developing a product or purchasing something from Blackboard that would fit into this. But the kind of flow is data set up and students giving a view of their assessments. Then we have kind of a differentiation between where students were submitting work online and they would get an originality check sort of opportunity beforehand, and when it says submit work other, which effectively is to say we wanted some way we could handle submissions which were a physical artifact, an art sculpture you made, an architectural model, maybe even something like a presentation in class that would be delivered but not submitted online in the same way because it was done in person. So those things are the kind of things. But both of these things after submission, effectively, then it joins back up whether it was submitted online or not. That effectively there would be the work is ready to mark, and then people could choose between a sort of marking online or a solution we came with called print to mark, which was which I'll explain more about later. But effectively, they could get the papers printed so that they could mark that on paper if they wanted to. And then here in the next section is putting feedback online as well as providing an initial mark. The one thing we did sort of add in, which touched on exams, is exam feedback, which the other group, the Assessment Design and Delivery group, looked at what sort of feedback we should be providing from exams, and we ended up changes to the policy on that. But then there's the process of internal moderation, external moderation, transferring the marks, having the boards in the final mark, any reassessment needed, which might start the whole process over again. So it kind of gives you a rough idea. So each of these developments are things that we determined we would want. So one is a receipt here, for instance. We would like a receipt to be issued to students whenever they submit, regardless of the way they're submitting. And so then these developments are related to that, as an example. And I'll go through some of those developments later, so don't worry if you can't read everything. The portal view here, this is the kind of a thing, is there's been a sort of concept that I think we're struggling to fully implement, to be honest, but which was around having an assessment portal, so a kind of one-stop shop for assessment that staff and students would be able to go to get the things they need around assessment. So students would be able to go there to see everything that is upcoming across their course, as well as their past marks and feedback. I'll show you the kind of light model that we kind of developed. But one of the ideas is to have a sort of more integrated thing, but there are some challenges to doing something like that. The only thing I'll explain on this diagram is we mapped out what system would do these tasks. So the color represents a system. So this is our SIS, is the purplish color. So they're doing the kind of bits here. Our VLE, Blackboard, is doing these sort of bits, as well as possibly turn it in for this originality checking. This blue thing is other systems that we might have. So we tried to kind of map out this, and this is one of a number of kind of maps that we have to try to make sure the process makes sense. We also kind of tried to map out from a staff, student, academic staff, professional services staff, or student role, how it would look to them, what were the bits they needed to know, and that's in a more complicated process map too. So I'll talk about some of the developments that we've had and kind of introduce, which is the online receipting one, which is a building block we purchased from Blackboard Consulting, which they have on offer. I've lobbied them that actually it's really good and it should just be included in the core product as is, because I think most people would benefit. With this, students receive an email when they submit work online through a Blackboard assignment. A copy of the receipt is stored in a content collection, which is really useful if there's any sort of, kind of disagreement, or you worry a student hasn't actually done it, there is a saved copy. Effectively, you can personalize it with sort of a logo and some of the messages, but it's got name, student ID, it's got the site name, which we call module, it's got the name of the assignment, the date, submission ID, how many files, what size, the names of the files, and then some links to help sort of details, which again are customizable as well. And Blackboard Consulting was really, when we saw the original thing, there were some issues in terms of our ability to customize some of that, and they were very helpful in terms of providing, I think, more customization in the receiving tool itself. And we were able to get that done in a couple months. Actually, that was the first thing delivered by the program. Students really like it, staff like it. So there's not many negatives to this one. And we've also looked at, well, when people aren't submitting online, can they get the same sort of receipt as well? And that's whether it looks very similar. We can try to make it look similar as part of the goal. But anyway, it's useful. I think the only limitation we've sort of found has been where we've used something like a media server, where the file is sort of uploaded through one of the mashup tools. Then it doesn't really show, obviously, as a file in the receipt because it's all in the text box editor. But that's not really the fault of the receiving part. That's something more to do with the way these sort of media files and things are integrated, I think. So anyway, that was the first thing we did, and so we got that from Blackboard. This one we developed in-house. This is a print-to-mark service. What we did is we have a next business day print and delivery service. So if academic staff don't want to mark on screen or have some health and safety concerns around that, we're not mandating marking online. We are mandating feedback online, which is different. And so anyway, what we've done is just using the Grade Center's assignment file download, this sort of typical assignment file download zip file. They can submit that through a form where you put in, it fills in some details of yourself, and you select things like where it's going to be delivered to, and having a what sort of size or color and things like that. And then you attach that zip file, send it, and then it shows up at your help desk the next business day is the idea. And we have a sort of 3-week feedback turnaround. So this is, if you do spend a day doing that, that is something you need to, it doesn't extend your 3-week turnaround. It is part of the 3-week turnaround. You're choosing to do this sort of thing. So anyway, that's how that one works. And there's a question about, does receiving tool work with turn-in submissions? No, it doesn't. It's just with Blackboard assignments, and Turnitin does issue its own email receipts. One of the things we did in that early mapping was determine, well, which solution do we want to use? Did we want to use something like Turnitin's grade mark feature to do marking online? Did we want to use Blackboard? Did we want to use both? That was kind of the whole process we went through early on to determine what technology would be best. In the end, due to some general discontent around Turnitin at times, we did this. We did sort of say we didn't really think we would move to grade mark on Turnitin, and we would just focus on Blackboard assignments as a main way of submitting work, basically. If there's a comment about paper and that yes, online is better, but I think some of it is to recognize a transition in terms of staff practices. This is a model that University of Derby had introduced, which we quite liked, where they did a print-to-mark system, and the cost for the printing comes from the departmental budgets as well, and so there's some impetus, I suppose, for departmental management to think about what they are doing and how much printing they're actually doing. There's kind of debate, because I think we would like people to go online in terms of marking, but equally already these are baby steps, isn't it? It's okay, all the work's going to be submitted and all the feedback will be online, but actually the receiving, the marking part, or you don't have to do it online, but as people get used to doing feedback online, maybe they'll say, oh, it's really not that bad. It's kind of some of our logic. So it's something I could see in the future doing. So And so going ahead to the next one. Integrated text matching. So there's some desire around all text-based submissions to check for originality. This isn't something that's required by policy right now, but it's something we're considering. And we've been looking at safe assignments over the past year and some pilots to try to have a single point of submission as well as access to originality reports at the time of marking, because actually they can do it on the sort of same screen. And because we don't have the turn it in grade mark functionality, which is what a lot of people rely on to do this, that was something that we sort of, as I said, have been slightly reluctant to kind of go down, partly because of some concerns people had around turn it in at other institutions. And one of the things that we're looking at around safe assign is possibly just enabling it by default for all the assignments next year, and not necessarily requiring that people use it, but effectively having it on in the background, picking up papers and saying, well, you can use turn it in too. It's not, you don't only have to use one. So if you're really keen on turn it in, and actually what we found is that they do pick up different things often, and they have slightly different logic and way of working as well. And I think that that raises some challenges for people who are used to turn it in as well, because it is a different system and it does work differently. So in terms of media-based submissions, we are currently, a lot of people are submitting larger media files around through Blackboard assignments. We did have a sort of problem where it took down the server when someone submitted a few gigabyte file this year, and we are trying to come up with a solution for how we can handle those sort of large file situations. We tried to sort of post red flags, but in the current version of Blackboard we're on, there's not actually a way of limiting that. But we are looking at having Medial, which is a new Helix server, to support media-based assessments, and it's kind of a picture of exactly how it integrates. I think there's something a bit funny for me about Blackboard's solution to this, in that all of the media servers kind of work through this mashup model, and actually what I would prefer is something where once you attach the file, that behind the scenes Blackboard might be pushing it to the right place. So, that actually the experience for the students was identical to submitting a video on this, but actually it goes, oh, this is a video, and then it's passing that processing over to that, and the storage over to a different solution would be that ideal for me, but we're dealing with what we can right now. We have some challenges around other large file types which aren't media-based, giant CAD files, giant 3D gaming files, and we've been looking at other solutions like cloud storage or local network drives for submission. But again, those things aren't typically integrated with Blackboard, so that starts to be yet another kind of thing you have to deal with. And one of our goals was to make it as consistent and simple for staff and students as possible, so you can use just a series of tools ideally. In terms of the batch upload of marks and feedback file attachments, this is something that we're looking at, and we're still kind of considering if it's good enough. The Blackboard has a solution around batch upload. It relies on zip files, and I think that is a difficulty for us, because a lot of our staff struggle with zip files, and requires sort of, you've got to name all the files in exactly the right format and things, otherwise it doesn't really work. So that's pretty much what we're kind of not sure about that. I think we are trying to understand is, does it seem like it's worth it or not? But it's an option from Blackboard that we have been exploring. So let's see, there are a few questions I'll just pick up now. The first one wasn't really a question, but from Leighton Skilton, says, double entry for marks and feedback for academics. That's been something we've been wanting to avoid throughout the whole process. So actually, that is part of something I'll touch on later around integrating the system with Blackboard. But in terms of Blackboard and the SIS, that is, but that is something that, we don't want, and we've pretty much trying to eliminate, and academics don't actually have double entry currently either. So, and then there's a question, what are options for submitting media to other non-Helix platforms? Again, most of them that are not Helix, like Captura, the things have a similar plugin with a mashup, so it looks very similar. And from everything I've seen, you do the mashup through the text box editor. But again, the process isn't 100% intuitive to students, and I think you may still get some of them trying to submit a media file in the typical way they might have submitted other files. We don't support anonymous marking. We don't have anonymous marking at university except for exams. We don't for coursework. That was the other question. Does our process support anonymous marking? One of the things that we were tasked at the beginning was we might want to do anonymous marking in the future. Don't do anything that would prohibit anonymous marking from happening. So we've sort of tried to overlay anonymous marking onto a lot of the thinking we have around things. So that's kind of what we've been thinking, is how do we not stop something from happening. So actually, one of the things is if you use Blackboard's anonymous marking options in the assignments, then the zip file that you get afterwards is also anonymized, which actually means we could potentially use that in our print to mark and it would still work fine. But other things like this batch upload doesn't really do anonymous marking in the same way, and it might be too difficult to do it through this or something. So we might be able to say, well, you can do anonymous marking, but these are the tools that you have available. Not everything, but there's a solution that you could do. There was there was a follow-up comment, which is to say that paper is double entry of marks and feedback, and that's potentially true, but actually what we're encouraging is, though, if you're reading the thing on there, that you're creating the feedback online. Thus, you're only creating the feedback and mark online. You're not creating it on the paper, and thus having double entry. Going on to the next one, this is the main thing around Grades Journey about marks transfer from Blackboard to our SIS, which is tribal sits. There's two main models, the LIS 2.0 standard, which is an out-of-the-box solution to create grade transfers, and the enhanced solution, which is effectively more of a flat file to transfer that includes some customization options around things like creating assignment submission points based on data from the SIS. Just kind of give you a sample of a bit what it looks like. It takes data like these columns here, coursework 1 and coursework 2 might be created from automatically in the system as weighted total columns, and then an academic has to kind of map what their grade center columns they're using for submission or otherwise into those. So there's a process of saying, 100% weighting of this, coursework 1 is this essay 1, and 100% is coursework 2 is essay 2. Now, because we don't have any actual names for our assessment tasks, they're all kind of just come up as coursework or exam in our looking at the system, which is why we need more of that assessment data in SITS to be able to actually sort of do this. In terms of transfer columns, these are transfer columns is what we sort of started calling them, and those things are what gets sent back. So whatever's in this column here and that one is what will get sent back to SITS next. In terms of giving, the next stage is after all your marks are kind of in and you've mapped them, is that the academic needs to start to give approval that they will be transferred by the system. So there's 3 options, which is a sort of course level where you can actually just say, I want this whole Blackboard courses stuff to be transferred. Any columns that are marked transfer columns in there, or you can go down to an individual one, or you can actually go down to an individual student. So this is an actual student username, and say I want to transfer that one's marks and say it's approved. But at no point, and this is a limitation I think in it is, does it actually show you what the current mark you're going to transfer is? So you really need to make sure those mappings are accurate beforehand, because it is quite easy to just say, okay, yeah, transfer everything, even if you haven't successfully mapped the column, so you'd be transferring zeros effectively. That is something we were sort of looking at. Well, is there some of the customization we would want around the way the transfer worked? There's a question, but I'll come back to that one a little bit later. In terms of some of the challenges that we found, the current challenge is around merged enrollments. We have a lot of these where we use the sort of parent-child type functionality in Blackboard to bring together multiple things occurrences from SITs into one Blackboard site. And the problem comes of knowing where to send those marks back to. And currently that's not supported well by the LIS2 solution. That said, Blackboard did announce that they are adding support for this at the April conference, which is very welcome. And I don't know the time frame on that. Maybe they can come in, but hopefully not too distant future that won't be an issue, because this sort of stopped something like 25% of ours from actually being able to transfer. Reassessment, in terms of how you would transfer reassessment tasks back to SITs, there were some limitations around that, which had more to do with the SITs and the things. There were some concerns about linking mark and transfer columns, those being steps that people need to do, and relying on academics to actually do that accurately could lead to problems where we need to chase the marks and things. There's no ability to transfer non-numerical marks, so grade-based assessment, if you just have pass-fail as an example, that doesn't transfer. And there would still be in this solution the kind of manual creation of assignments based on that. So then there's also the kind of an enhanced or bespoke solution, which is actually the one, if you go to the other people like GCU or Galway's presentations, they use this one because they don't have SITs. So actually, this is the only option if you don't have tribal SITs as your SIS anyway. But so this is effectively a little bit more flexible in the sense that you can actually do things like set up submission points. You can't set up Turnitin ones, but you can set up Blackboard assignments using this, and other sort of gradable items, grades in columns or blogs or things like that, as I understand it. But again, there's some limitations around things like merge enrollments, reassessment, and one of the things is that we think with this one you should be able to do more of that, mapping the transfer columns to the thing you set up, because if you're setting up both a transfer column for a task and a submission point for a task, then in theory you at least should know you can associate those two. This is 100% of that. But there will always be some things that you'll never be able to set up. You know, if you are using Turnitin or PebblePad or some things that you probably can't set those up. Therefore, you're going to need to have somebody still do some of that mark transfer. And I think there's more work on the back end of how you get it back out of the VL8 into the student record system. We certainly found it difficult with SITs to kind of, when we were exploring this option, see exactly how we would get it all back. So there's a question, are we using StuTalk with SITs? We are, I think, at an early stage of understanding StuTalk with SITs would be my comment on that. I don't know, John, if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the LIS2 Grace Journey product, that's primarily sort of the integration capability we're using in the prototype. But just to be clear, it was only at that prototype stage that we're at. But in terms of sort of where we are now, we're looking at other mechanisms around sort of the integration and looking at other middleware solutions such as BizTalk, which is looking at this sort of more enhanced bespoking of the Grades Journey solution.
Thanks. There was also a question about, do you just transfer marks if you consider grade schemas as well? And we've mostly focused on transferring marks. We have grade schemas sort of in SIDS, but which manage the rules around sort of, you know, capping and things, but we didn't really find it necessary to kind of have those in Blackboard. I think there is some provision. We didn't really explore that very much. And then there was a question about how do you handle multiple marking or mark sections of coursework and then want to calculate an overall mark for the paper. We don't really have that situation, I don't think, where people mark separate sections of coursework together. We have sometimes double marking or things, but they're all done sort of separately. So it's not really a situation that we would encounter, I don't think. But again, I mean, most of the kind of marking process we really just left up to the academics. So if they had a way of doing it before, they would do it. So then there was a question, you are passing marks. You are passing marks using grades journey only. Well, actually, we're not. We kind of looked at it and decided that these limitations, we did a scoping exercise, and we could only transfer, say, 75% of marks or something like that. And because in particular merge enrollment functionality, so at that point we determined that actually we wouldn't be able to replace anything we were already doing, because somebody would still need to kind of manually be going. Our current process is emailing a grade center spreadsheet to people who go through it and put it in the SITs by typing it in effectively. And due to the kind of complexity of things in SITs, we'd have to essentially still do that to try to find the missing 25% of marks, which we just determined wasn't really worth doing at this point. So we could do something, but we decided that what we could do now wasn't good enough, and we would rather kind of have improvements to the process, such as merge enrollments or better handling of reassessment, before we could really go to that stage of actually doing it in a production way. So we're not actually doing this currently. And we are currently discussing how quickly maybe we want to go to this too, in terms of, we were one of the first institutions to look at it, and maybe there's an additional cost to that, and versus how much benefit are we actually getting. I mean, we're still exploring things like the submission point creation, and probably using the non-LIS solution to do that is the primary focus we're looking at right now. One of the last things which we've sort of mapped out is a kind of, which we haven't built yet, but is a student view of assessments across the course, across the program of study, to give them an idea of kind of both dates that are coming up, upcoming due dates, as well as being able to have quick links to feedback. This is really important for students when they're having a conversation with their academic advisor, personal tutor sort of person, about how well they're doing, that they could quickly see progress across the piece, because that's kind of missing right now for us. Just some other things we're kind of assessment portals further building on that student view. Offline receipting is something that we're engaging with Blackboard Consulting around, which would be effectively kind of allowing someone to receipt that they had received something, and yet it mark in Grade Center and issue receipts similar to the assignment functionality. If you think of it as assignments that someone else submits for you, effectively. Marking work electronically. So we have done a lot of work on things like use of Crocodoc or feedback rubrics, and created case studies around the options. So we have promoted marking work electronically, even though it's not a requirement, as well as things like audio feedback and other things. In terms of external moderation, we're going to be giving external examiners access to Blackboard through a special role, and putting them online automatically on each Blackboard site, with essentially read-only access to most of the site, and then they'll have full Grade Center access, because we can't give them read-only access, and it'd be more of a pain to not give them access. So, as well as reporting, we need some reports around things like, are we meeting our 3-week turnaround? Is work being submitted online in the way it's supposed to be? That sort of stuff. And that's it. So there's a couple questions that are here, which was, we have a better way of setting up assessment, submit work here at Bristol Uni. Well, I'd love to hear about that. Maybe we can follow that up afterwards, or if we have enough time, you could talk about it. And another question, does your assessment structure match between Blackboard and SITs? For example, 6 pieces of coursework for the module exist in both systems, or are you aggregating the coursework mark in a single placeholder in the SITs? All right. We do have something called subtasks, which exists in some of our modules, and effectively we have a limit that each module might only have, say, 1, 2, or 3 pieces of assessment. So those would be the tasks. Yet there are some which, for various reasons, such as professional body reasons, have one of those tasks is actually, like 6 subcomponents. And SITS doesn't know about those, and effectively those will be managed by the academics in Blackboard. But with the mark transfer, effectively, because it's a weighted total, suppose there were 2 tasks and one was a subtask, then in Blackboard there'd be 2 mark transfer columns, one for sort of task 1 and one for task 2. Suppose task 2 has the subtasks, then they would map in using the weighted total, this is 15%, this is 20%, this is in there, and they effectively could use that to manage that themselves. But always in that sits is a single assessment task, if that makes sense. So that mapping, that sort of mapping to weighted comps would have to be done by the academic, because we don't have any idea at this stage what is in their Blackboard site. So they may have in their Blackboard site a, sorry, I don't know if I repeated the question, which was, is the mapping done manually or not? And the mapping would have to be done automatically. Would have to be done manually by the academic. Right now, if we went through a solution where we were creating things like assessment submission points, we would look to see if we could also do that mapping for that assessment task at the same time. But in cases of things like the subtasks that I mentioned, or where, take group assignments as an example, you can't set up group assignments ahead of time because it pretty much just breaks everything in Blackboard if you don't have the groups already defined. So if we were to do this before the academic year started, it might have problems. Then you would need the academic to still do that mapping. So we hope to maybe move to where do some of the mapping automatically. But I think, the reality is there is some mapping happening currently, in the sense that if our academics give a Blackboard Grade Center spreadsheet to the administrator and say, here are all my marks, well, sometimes they have, 10 Blackboard tests and they've got this other thing, and the academic doesn't really know which of these are, that task for course one, and which is the marks for that. So at some point they're saying, yeah, that's that task, and this is this task. And so, we're, in a way, they're doing it often by email or something currently. So this would be, in effect, systematizing something that people are already doing, but obviously you're relying on them actually doing it accurately and stuff, and that is a challenge. I think that's recognized. Anyway, that's the end of the presentation. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask them as well.